So antifungals, these are drugs that specifically um, target fungal infections, and we have two different types of fungal infections in general. Excuse me. So first of all, we have superficial mycoses such as ringworm, just occurring on the skin of an animal or in the nail beds, claws, that kinds of things. Um, those are considered superficial, and they've come from the environment, and they are contagious between animals in that way. And then we have deep or systemic mycoses, and these are ones that are typically more environmental. Animals will get them from the environment, from the soil, um, dust, that kind of thing. So, and they get into the lungs and then they go throughout the body into different organs. And these are fungal infections such as histoplasmosis, blastomycosis, cryptococcosis, coccidiomycosis, candidiasis, sporotrichosis, and aspergillosis, which you guys have a case study about. So we're going to talk about the different types of antifungals. In this section, we'll probably just talk about amphotericin B and the azoles, and then I'll finish up in the next section with the antivirals at the end. So this little dog, this puppy, it's pretty typical to get fungal, especially ringworm in puppies and kittens, especially if they have been kept outside. But shelters will usually also kind of have cause the spread of these if they're not very careful. But this little pup has the typical shape. So they are called ringworm. They'll sometimes have an outer ring to them, and then the inner part tends to become less dark, and so that it has that kind of ring look to it. But it'll typically be round patches. In general, if you have a puppy or kitten that comes in with hair loss like this, you want to just count on it that it is ringworm until you prove otherwise. And put some gloves on. Don't get it, and just be aware that it very well could be that. And these guys are contagious among each other. So, so we'll talk about amphotericin B and nystatin first. Your book separates them in the chapter, but I'm going to talk about them because they have some similarities, but we do use them in different ways. So the mode of action is that they bind to ergosterol, which is part of the fungal cell membrane, and cause leakage of the cell membrane, and it leads to death. It's kind of similar to penicillins, but we don't need a rapidly growing colony. It doesn't interfere with the development or construction of the cell wall like in penicillins, but it just causes them to become leaky. So they can be fungicidal or fungostatic, just depending on what kind of concentration we get at the site, and we use them in very different ways. So nystatin is used topically, and it's used topically because it's very nephrotoxic if we were to try to use it systemically. So we'll use it for things like malassezia and candida, and these are little yeasts here. So, yeast infections on these dogs that tend to have a lot of jowls and pendulous ears. And if you're in a humid area and it holds that wetness against the skin, and yeast can kind of easily be part of an ear infection. So it's not uncommon to have this drug combined with neomycin, triamcinolone in some topical types of ointments. And depending on the time, it seems like these drugs have kind of rotated. I don't know if they just aren't that profitable, and so then other companies come up with them. But in the past, this drug has been called Panalog, Animax, Dermalone. Probably has some other names now that I'm not aware of, and typically it just kind of goes between different manufacturers for whatever reason, but topical with an antifungal in it. So we don't give nystatin orally. Amphotericin B, on the other hand, we don't give it orally either, but we do give it systemically. The more the ones that are used more these days are the liposomal form. They can be a little expensive, but they are basically encapsulating the drug in a lipid, and it just makes it less nephrotoxic. So amphotericin B is also nephrotoxic. We give it parenterally, so we give it IV, and it will act very quickly. So this is a fungal infection. Whoa, fungal infection in the lungs there. So we give it IV. There are some sub-Q dosages as well because it isn't absorbed well from the gastrointestinal tract. We do need to evaluate renal function before and while we're treating an animal, and then after we finish treatment. This nephrotoxicity is permanent. It's not usually reversible, so we're anticipating it's going to happen, and we're going to go as long as we can, maybe reduce the dosage if we start to see some of this, but the way we're going to try to head it off, it doesn't totally prevent it, but it seems to keep it from getting worse as fast, let's say that about it, is that we keep them hydrated. So we'll typically give these drugs with fluids if we're giving it IV. The amphotericin H, or the lipid complexes, are safer than the old ones, but we'll still just count on it that we might see some renal damage. We'll check creatinine, BUN, and do a urinalysis to look for protein in the urine before we give, and then we'll keep watching for it. Sorry, I'll go back up there. We'll keep watching for it as we give the drug. So I'll talk about the drugs that we call the azoles. All of these drugs, and I've got a couple more, have this end suffix to them, azole. Ketoconazole, itraconazole, fluconazole, voriconazole. And these cause leakage in the fungal cell membrane, like amphotericin B, but they interfere, interfere with an enzyme that affects the ergosterol. So they similarly cause that leakage. We can give these orally, but the big difference between them is that there's going to be a delayed action. It can take 5 to 10 days for these to take effect. So sometimes animals get started on amphotericin B, and we put them on these as well to kind of get the whole thing started, the whole treatment started, and then we can transition them off of the amphotericin B. We don't need to take them off slowly. I'm not implying that. We'll just, continue. We'll start on both of the drugs and then discontinue the amphotericin B when the ketoconazole or whichever of these is going to take effect. So we can see some hepatotoxicity. It's not so common, and we can also see some VAD, some vomiting, anorexia, and diarrhea with the conazoles, or azoles, as I call them. Sounds like an island chain or something. We do need to be careful about usage of ketoconazole in particular with pregnant animals because there has been some fetal deaths associated with it. So we can use other ones. So I would be prone to not using ketoconazole if I could use something else in a pregnant animal. Itraconazole is known to be more potent, so sometimes it is the preferred one. And fluconazole is noted as being less hepatotoxic. We do have some topicals in this family. So clotrimazole and miconazole are two that are used, and these are used in human yeast infections as well. And so they'll be used in dermatophytes, the topical. And then we'll also use this in treating nasal aspergillosis. So it gets infused into the nasal cavity or in birds. It may be put in the nares or used as nebulized and get into those same areas. So all of those areas are open to the air, the nasal cap passages and the skin. We'll find these two in odic ointments, so ear treatments, and lotion sprays and shampoos that are used to treat mild yeast infections.